morning. This hearing of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee will come to order. Mr. Secretary, welcome back to Washington. I understand you've traveled to 44 countries, logged in over 855 hours in the air, which translates to an incredible 35 days of flying. So I imagine it feels good to have your feet on the ground in a familiar place like this committee, which you once chaired. So we look forward to hearing your priorities for the State Department for the coming year as the situations in the Ukraine, Syria, and Venezuela demonstrate never has the need for American leadership and engagement in the world been greater. We understand the limitations and constraints that govern the budgetary environment and that getting our fiscal house in order at home is the wellspring from which our national power flows. But in this complex and rapidly changing global environment, we also know that our national security interests are priority number one, and they cannot be jeopardized. The $40.3 billion in base discretionary funding for the Department of State and USAID, equal to the 2014 enacted level, provides solid footing after several years of uncertainty for our international efforts. And the $5.9 billion for overseas contingency operation activities allow us to continue to address challenges in the Middle East and North Africa, including the Syrian humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan and other frontline states. We also need to make sure this budget is structured so that our nation is capable of meeting the new challenges and opportunities of today's world. And we face many challenging issues. Most recently, the menacing threat by Russia and Ukraine, a challenge to its very existence. We can and will continue to stand with the Ukrainian people who, by right, will choose their own destiny. In addition to authorizing $1 billion in loan guarantees for Ukraine and other assistance to strengthen civil society and security in the region, we've also given you tools to respond to Russia in the form of sanctions. And our message to President Putin and his cronies must be robust and swift. On Syria, as we commemorate the 3rd anniversary of the uprising, I'm pleased that the administration is prioritizing assistance, both in humanitarian aid and support for the Syrian opposition. That $1.7 billion request sends an important signal to the world and to the Syrian people of our commitment. But this leads to a broader question, that we can demonstrate U.S. leadership on humanitarian assistance, but I'd like to hear from you, Mr. Secretary, how we are demonstrating and intend to demonstrate leadership in ending this crisis. On Afghanistan and Pakistan, let me say I support the administration's efforts to right-size our investments in the Overseas Contingency Operations account. But in this year of transition, I was hoping that more of that budget could be shifted into the base budget so that we could begin to normalize the assistance for these frontline states. We'd also should take special note of the elections held in Afghanistan this weekend. In the face of intimidation by the Taliban, the Afghan people demonstrated their desire to shape their destiny of their own country. The election was a historic marker in our engagement in Afghanistan, and we are hopeful that the final result will be credible and genuinely reflect the will of the Afghan people. Now, there is a place that I'm disappointed in the budget, and that is in the Western Hemisphere. The 2015 request is a $358 million, or 21% decrease from the FY13 budget. I'm incredibly troubled that every other major account in the Western Hemisphere is being cut, and that where these programs are coming to an end, there's not a reinvesting in those funds in the region. I don't dispute the importance of other priorities laid out in the administration's proposal, but I have seen year after year after year after year a continuous cut in the hemisphere, and I believe that those cuts lead us to lack a comprehensive approach to Latin America and the necessary resources to back it up. Whether in Central America, where nations are facing a crisis of criminal violence and major challenges to governance and the rule of law, where Honduras and El Salvador continue to have the world's highest murder rates, which undercut economic development in those countries and in turn lead to high levels of immigration that directly affect our country. And then threats to democracy, freedom of expression, and human rights in our hemisphere, from Cuba to Venezuela and Ecuador, should be a concern to us. As the volatile situation in Venezuela has shown, undermining democracy can lead to a political crisis and economic instability that has implications for the entire region. So let me close simply by saying the overall budget sets a strong proposed funding level, but along with my concerns about Western Hemisphere issues, I'm also concerned that there are significant reductions in humanitarian assistance and global health accounts. There's a nearly 5% cut in global health, with the largest reductions in the global fund to fight AIDS, TB, and malaria. So with those concerns and what I overall find a budget that I can support, I want to thank you, Mr. Secretary, for coming back to the committee. We look forward to hearing your views on all of these areas of concerns. I'm sure many members will have many questions outside of the budget as well. And with that, let me turn to Senator Corker for his remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I too want to extend my welcome back here. I know you've been doing a lot of traveling, and since we don't really pass budgets or reconcile them, and since we haven't yet moved to authorizations, although I think we may soon, I'm not going to address the budgetary issues, but talk about some other policy issues if I could. Mr. Secretary, we all appreciate so much your willingness to serve in the capacity that you are right now. We all supported you. You had unanimous support of this committee and everybody in the Senate to gone after it with a tremendous amount of energy. But I think I can speak, I think there's probably not a person on this committee, in spite of their appreciation for what you're doing, that doesn't have concerns someplace relative to our foreign policy at present. Syria, this committee strongly supported the authorization for the use of force. Committee passed overwhelmingly support for the opposition. And I think all of us understand today that the smartest thing Assad did for his own self-survival was to kill 1,200 people with chemical weapons. We ended up jumping in Syria's lap. We now sit in the back of the bus as Iran and Russia really drive policy in Syria. One of your assistants was up here a few weeks ago and made some really reckless comments about a military strategy, if you will, in Syria, and said that they would brief us. We've had no briefing. It's been 2 weeks, and as the chairman mentioned, instead of that, we read about something last night in the Wall Street Journal relative to disputes between you and the Pentagon. And I do hope today that you will lay out clearly for us in this open setting what our strategy is in Syria, and hopefully it's not just allowing people to kill each other off. Since the chemical weapons were used, another 50,000 people have been killed. Barrel bombs are being dropped indiscriminately on populations there. Assad is dragging his feet on alleviating the chemical weapons because he knows that prolongs his survival and continues to allow us, Russia, and Iran to prop him up. So I know there are a lot of concerns about our Syria policy. We have no policy, from what I can tell, other than, again, allowing people to kill each other off, and us making commitments to the opposition that we do not honor, and leaving them in refugee camps and basically stranded without the support that we committed to on the front end. In Ukraine, you know, here we have a 40,000 troop buildup. We know that per public records, Russia is basically paying people to foment violence in the eastern part of the country. I hope that you will address when we will implement the executive order relative to sectoral sanctions. And hopefully that'll be this week if they continue to have the buildup that they have. I'm confused by the policy. We castigate them on one side. On the other hand, we're exchanging paper with them. I'm confused about what our policy really is. In Iran, this is the first administration ever to agree that Iran will enrich uranium. That has never happened in the history of our country, and yet this administration has agreed to that. In Afghanistan, I'm concerned that because of a monster that we've created, Karzai, and his actions, which are certainly incoherent, I'm afraid that we're going to pull out and not do the things that have been so strongly recommended by the Pentagon and others. And in China, in the Senkakus, we have a situation where we have unresolved disputes. We have skirmishes that are occurring. These are the kind of things that create world wars. And yet our allies are concerned about where our support is. Japan is continuing to move ahead with ways of creating their own abilities to defend themselves. So, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary, excuse me, I have a lot of questions. And my sense is that the administration in so many ways, through rhetoric and persuasion, seems to think that people like the leaders of Russia and China and other places respond to nice rhetoric. I don't think that's the case. I'm concerned about our policy, and I hope today, due to questioning that I'm sure many will have, including me, I hope you will lay out very clearly what our policies are in these areas. Mr. Chairman, I thank you for calling the hearing, and I look forward to our witness.
Thank you, Senator Corker. With that, Mr. Secretary, the floor is yours. Your full statement will be entered into the record without objection, and we look forward to your statement and then to engaging in a dialogue with you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. Ranking Member Corker, members of the committee. I'm very happy to be back here and appreciate enormously the committee's indulgence to have shifted this hearing because it came at a critical moment just before I was asked by the President to meet with Lavrov relative to Ukraine. And so I also want to thank everybody on the committee for working so hard to move the nominations, which obviously is critical. I think it's not the fault of the committee, but with the combination of vetting process and public process and so forth, and the combination of the slowdown on the floor of the Senate, I think we're averaging something like 220 some days, and some people at 300 days, and some over 365 days. So I have literally only in the last month gotten my top team in place 1 year in, and I'm very grateful to the committee. Mr. Chairman, you've worked really hard to make that happen, and the ranking member, great cooperation. Senator McCain and others helped to intervene on that, and I want to thank you all for that. A lot of questions, Senator Corker, that you raised, and I really look forward to answering all of them because there is a cohesive approach. We're living in an extremely complicated world, unlike anything most of us grew up with. And we can talk about that here today because it really is critical to the question of how we deal as the United States in our budget, in our own politics here, and in our in the choices we make. Obviously, Senator Corker just brought it up, the intense focus on Ukraine continues. And everything that we've seen in the last 48 hours from Russian provocateurs and agents operating in eastern Ukraine tells us that they've been sent there determined to create chaos. And that is absolutely unacceptable. These efforts are as ham-handed as they are transparent, frankly. And quite simply, what we see from Russia is an illegal and illegitimate effort to destabilize a sovereign state and create a contrived crisis with paid operatives across an international boundary engaged in this initiative. Russia's clear and unmistakable involvement in destabilizing and engaging in separatist activities in the east of Ukraine is more than deeply disturbing. No one should be fooled, and believe me, no one is fooled by what could potentially be a contrived pretext for military intervention, just as we saw in Crimea. It is clear that Russian special forces and agents have been the catalysts behind the chaos of the last 24 hours. Some have even been arrested and exposed. And equally as clear must be the reality that the United States and our allies will not hesitate to use 21st century tools to hold Russia accountable for 19th century behavior. We have stated again and again that our preference, and the preference of our friends and allies, is de-escalation and a diplomatic solution. But Russia should not for a single solitary second mistake the expression of that preference as an unwillingness to do what is necessary to stop any violation of the international order. At NATO last week, and in all of my conversations of the past weeks, it is clear that the United States and our closest partners are united in this effort, despite the costs, and willing to put into effect tough new sanctions on those orchestrating this action and on key sectors of the Russian economy. In energy, banking, mining, they're all on the table. And President Obama has already signed an executive order to implement these sanctions if Russia does not end its pressure and aggression on Ukraine. Now, let me make an equally important statement. It doesn't have to be this way, but it will be this way if Russia continues down this provocative path. In my conversation yesterday with Foreign Minister Lavrov, we agreed to meet soon in Europe, next week, with Ukraine and our European partners to discuss de-escalation, demobilization, inclusivity, support for elections, and constitutional reform. And it is not, in our judgment, a small matter that Russia has agreed to sit in this four-party status with Ukraine at the table in an effort to try to forge a road ahead. Between now and then, we have made it clear that Russia needs to take concrete steps to disavow separatist actions in eastern Ukraine, pull back its forces outside the country, which they say they have begun to do with the movement of 1 battalion, and demonstrate that they are prepared to come to these discussions to do what is necessary to de-escalate. So Russia has a choice: to work with the international community to help build an independent Ukraine that could be a bridge between East and West, not the object of a tug of war, that could meet the hopes and aspirations of all Ukrainians, or they could face greater isolation and pay the cost for their failure to see that the world is not a zero-sum game. Ukraine and so many other ongoing simultaneous challenges globally reinforce what I said a moment ago to all of you. I think the members of this committee have long appreciated it. That is that this is not the bipolar, straightforward choice of the Cold War. We're living in an incredibly challenging time where some of the things that the East-West order took for granted most of my life are suddenly finding a world in which American engagement is more critical, and in many ways it's more complicated because of nation-state interests, balance of power, other kinds of issues that are on the table. You all travel. All the members of this committee do that. And you see what I see in every place that I travel as secretary. On issue after issue, people depend on American leadership to make a difference. That has been reinforced to me more than perhaps any other single thing in the year that I've been privileged to be secretary. Whether it's South Sudan, a nation that many of you helped to give birth to, now a nation struggling to survive beyond its infancy, or Venezuela, where leaders are making dangerous choices at the expense of the people, or in Afghanistan, where this weekend millions defied the Taliban and went to the polls to choose a new president, or on the Korean Peninsula, where we are working with our allies and our partners to make sure that we can meet any threat and move towards the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. I think I've had 5 meetings with President Xi this year and 5 trips to Asia already in furtherance of our efforts to, and 2 of those meetings were with the President, with President Xi, in an effort to further our goals there. U.S. presence and leadership does matter. And that's why our rebalance to the Asia-Pacific has been supported and welcomed by people throughout the region. We also have great allies, great partners, but the fact remains that no other nation can give people the confidence to come together and confront some of the most difficult challenges in the same way as we are privileged to do. I say that without arrogance. I say it as a matter of privilege. We have this ability. And I hear this from leaders all over the world. I particularly hear it about the Middle East peace process. I read some who question why the Secretary of State is engaged or is intense as he might be, or why the United States should be doing this if the parties don't want to do this. Well, the truth is the parties say they want to continue these talks. The truth is the parties are actually still talking to each other in an effort to try to see if they can get over this hurdle and make that happen. But I have one certainty in my mind. I have yet to meet any leader anywhere in the world who argues to me that it's going to be easier next week, or easier next month, or easier next year, or easier in the next 5 years to achieve a long sought after goal if the United States is not engaged now. There's no foreign minister anywhere that I've met with, no leader. When I visited recently at the Vatican with His Eminence, the Secretary of State, Cardinal Parolin, this is first and foremost in the minds of people all over the world. Prime Minister Abe, the Prime Minister of Indonesia, they ask you, do we have a chance of making peace in the Middle East? Because everywhere it is a recruitment tool, everywhere it is a concern, everywhere it has an impact. And the fact is that everybody volunteers gratitude for the fact that the United States is engaged in that effort. So whether it was NATO this past week or the G7 last week or the Vatican itself, I've heard from minister after minister just how much the global community is invested in this effort. Japan just committed several $100 million to the Palestinians for assistance. The Saudis, the Qataris, the Emiratis have each responded to our request and committed to $150 million each to assist the Palestinians going forward. So this is something that has an impact on everybody. And believe me, it has an impact on life in the United States too. So we will continue to the degree that the parties want to. It's up to them. They have to make decisions, not us. They have to come to the conclusion that it's worth it. The same is true on Iran, where every country understands the danger that a nuclear-armed Iran would pose to our national security and to the security of our allies. And that is why we have been so focused, along with all of you, on forging an unprecedented coalition to impose the sanctions. From day one, this administration has made it a foreign policy goal to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. To achieve this goal, we have been clear that we will use all the elements of our national power, including direct negotiations with Iran, the very kind that we are engaged in as I speak. We are approaching these talks seriously and with our eyes wide open. That's why, as we negotiate, we continue to enforce sanctions on Iran not affected by the joint plan of action. Not just, incidentally, over its nuclear activities, but also because of its support for terrorism. And we will press the case on human rights and its record wherever we can. And we will continue to urge Iran to release our American citizens, Amir Hekmati, Saeed Abedini, and we will work to help find Robert Levinson. All three should be home with their families, and that is consistently raised by us with any Iranian official when we engage. These are just some of the biggest issues that we're focused on each and every day simultaneously, my colleagues. They're not the only ones. Senators Corker and McCain, you've both been to the Syrian refugee camps on the border. You've seen the horrors firsthand, as I have. And this committee has focused on the moral and security imperative that is Syria. And I'm particularly grateful for the fact that you voted the way you did. The one body in the Congress that took that vote. And it was a courageous and important vote. We are focused on this every single day, and we are currently routing increased assistance to the moderate opposition. I know we'll talk about this in the course of this hearing. We're wrestling with these tough challenges, even as we are moving the State Department ahead in our business, to help our businesses succeed in a world where foreign policy is economic policy. One of the things I want to emphasize, when I became the nominee, I said to everybody on the committee that foreign policy is economic policy is foreign policy in today's world. And so we have set ourselves up in the State Department to be increasingly geared towards helping American businesses and towards creating new partnerships in an effort to also promote our foreign policy goals. We're focused on jobs diplomacy and shared prosperity. That's why Embassy Wellington just helped a company in New Jersey land a $350 million contract to lay fiber optics across the Pacific. It's why our consulate in Shenyang has been so engaged to reverse tariffs against American agricultural products. It's the challenge of the modern State Department in a modern world, and that is to wrestle with the challenges and opportunities that come at us faster than ever before. It's a challenge balanced also against security in a dangerous world. which is why this budget implements the recommendations of the Independent Accountability Review Board and makes additional investments that go above and beyond what the review board recommended. So I want to thank you, all of you, for everything you've done for the security of our missions, and I want to thank you for the way this committee stands up for an active, internationalist, American foreign policy that's in our interests. I spent enough time here in this room, as well as in the Senate, to know that you don't call anything that costs billions of dollars a bargain. But when you consider that the American people pay just 1 penny of every tax dollar for the $46.2 billion in this request, I think it's safe, and if you add OCO, it's the 50.1. I think it's safe to say that in the grand scheme of the federal budget, when it comes to the State Department and USAID, taxpayers are getting an extraordinary return on their investment. So I thank you for your partnership in these efforts, and I look forward to our conversation today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary, for that comprehensive and review of both our challenges and the opportunities and the daily mission of the men and women of the State Department. I want to go to Iran. I read an article yesterday that is entitled in the Wall Street Journal, Obama Administration Shows Optimism on Iran Nuclear Talks. And despite significant political hurdles and vastly different stated positions with reference to Tehran's nuclear programs, in public comments, there's this sense of progress and optimism, and I'm trying to glean where that's from. And I'm worried when I read this and other articles where it says, quote, some officials who have worked on developing the Obama administration's negotiating position towards Tehran have acknowledged that major concessions are needed by both sides for a deal to be reached. The complete dismantling of Tehran's uranium enrichment facilities and the Iraq reactor, initial demands of the West, is no longer achievable. The West is unlikely to get a complete accounting from Tehran of the secret nuclear weapons work the West believes it conducted in the past. So, and it goes on to say that the suggestion is that the P5+1 should instead focus on extending the time it would take for Iran to break out and produce nuclear weapons to between 6 and 12 months. Now, I don't think that we did everything that we've done to only get a 6 or 12 months lead time, because a deal that would ultimately unravel the entire sanctions regime for a 6 to 12 month lead time is not far from where we are today. And with no sanctions regime in place, and understanding that every sanctions that we have pursued have needed at least a 6 months lead time to become enforceable, and then a greater amount of time to actually enforce, that the only option left to the United States, to this or any other president, and to the West would be either to accept a nuclear-armed Iran or to have a military option. So I want to hear from you, Mr. Secretary, whether that is where we believe success lies, or is the success as outlined by a letter by 83 members of the Senate to the President, where we say that we believe that we need to dismantle Iran's nuclear weapons program and preventing it from having either a uranium or plutonium path to a nuclear bomb, where we believe that there is no enrichment facility needs like Fordo and Iraq, and where we must get evidence of what happened in Parchin. I'm trying to get a sense of these parameters, because to the extent that the administration has asked for forbearance, part of it is going to have to be based on having an understanding of what is the parameters, and I would assume, and I ask you this question specifically, does the administration, if it strikes a deal, ultimately believe that it needs to come back to the Congress for the approval of such a deal in terms of the elements of the law that exist today that would have to be repealed?
Well, Mr. Chairman, good questions all, and entirely appropriate for us to try to dig into that a little bit. Let me begin by saying, first of all, I'm not expressing optimism one side or the other. I remain agnostic and questioning, even as we are just about halfway through. I talked with our team on the ground in Vienna yesterday. They are having serious, expert, in-depth, detailed conversations about what it takes to achieve our goal. I mean, proving that this is a peaceful program. I think it's fair to say that I think it's public knowledge today that we're operating with a time period for a so-called breakout of about 2 months. That's been in the public domain. So 6 months to 12 months is, I'm not saying that's what we'd settle for, but even that is significantly more. Remember, breakout means that they make a decision to race to sort of move out of the regime that's been put in place and overtly move to enrich sufficiently to create enough material for one weapon. That's what breakout means. It doesn't mean they've gotten to a warhead or to a delivery system or to even a test capacity or anything else. It's just having one bomb's worth, conceivably, of material, but without any necessary capacity to put it in anything, to deliver it, to have any mechanism to do so, and otherwise. And we have amazing capacity that is being built into this system to understand what they're doing. During just the JPOA implementation, we are inspecting in Fordow. We've never been in there before. We are inspecting in Natanz. We haven't been in there. We are occasionally, I think several times a month, once or twice a month, inspecting in the Iraq facility. They cannot move anything into the Iraq facility to complete its commissioning. We are inspecting their storage of centrifuges. We are inspecting their mining and their milling and so forth. We have a huge track here of what they're doing. And so the greater likelihood is that at the end of this, we hope to be able to come to you with an agreement that has the most extensive and comprehensive and accountable verification process that can be achieved in order to know what they're doing. So when we talk about the number of months, we don't know what they are yet, but if you know, I mean, you have to think about this. If they make a decision to break out, sanctions aren't going to be what make the difference. If they're overtly breaking out and breaking an agreement and starting to enrich and pursue it, they've made a huge consequential decision. And the greater likelihood is we are going to respond immediately.
Well,
in order to make sure there's...
I gather what we're doing now. I have to be honest with you, if the end result is a 6 or 12-month window for which the sanctions regime will have fallen, and it's true that if they decide to break out, but the only question is the reason they're at the table is because of the sanctions regime. The reason that they, depending upon how we act, will calculate as to whether or not make that decision is the consequences internally to their economy and the concerns that the Ayatollah has about regime change, either from without, which is his constant concern, or from within because of the economic catalyst that can be created in Iran. And so if 6 to 12 months is where we end up with,
Well, as I said,
I know that you haven't said that, but since you said that would still be more significant than 2 months, the bottom line is it is not, I would hope, where we end up with, because with their research and development capacity still moving forward as we speak, which only allows them to create more sophisticated centrifuges, which closes the window for them even more quickly, with their missile development as well. These are all elements of a worrisome, it is far different from where we started off and what we were told to where I believe we are heading. And this is why so many members joined us in staking out a ground so that the administration understands. Does the administration intend to come back to the Congress if you have a final deal for ultimately lifting some of the elements that would be needed to be lifted under law.
Well, of course, we'd be obligated to under the law, Mr. Chairman. We would absolutely have to. And so clearly, what we do will have to pass muster with Congress. We well understand that. But let me just say very quickly, all of the things you just raised are very much contemplated. I mean, these are all part of the conversation. The research, what kind of research, warheads particularly. There has to be a huge level of transparency. Now, you mentioned the Iraq reactor. We've been very clear that there is no legitimacy to a full-on heavy water plutonium reactor, none whatsoever, in any scheme that they have articulated for private sector use. So that has to be dealt with in the context of the negotiations.
I agree, but originally we were told that's going to be dismantled. Now we are told we're going to find a different purpose for it. It continues to morph into different areas. Let me ask you one final question.
There's no, actually, let me just clarify, Mr. Chairman. First of all, nothing, it's written in the Joint Action Plan.
Nothing is agreed to until
Correct.
everything's agreed.
Nothing's agreed till everything is agreed. This is a mosaic that's going to have to be put together, and I can assure you that we're going to strive to get the longest period we can get in terms of breakout. And there are a number of different options as to how it can be managed, but the important thing is that it's not a heavy water plutonium reactor. That's critical.
Well, one final question. The Russians, we have seen consistent iterations of a barter deal, which clearly, if it was consummated, would be sanctionable. And so my question is, number one, if such a deal actually comes into fruition, is it the administration's intention to sanction those actions? And I look at this in our engagement with Russia, and we meet with Russia to broker a deal over Syria in September. We have a worsening humanitarian disaster and a delay on chemical weapons. We meet with Russia over Iran, and there's an oil for goods deal with Russia and Iran that sources say could be worth $20 billion. Russia annexes Crimea and destabilizes the Ukraine. I mean, I'm beginning to wonder, you know, what it is that, at what point in this relationship with Russia, particularly vis-a-vis Iran, but even beyond, is it going to be clear that there are consequences? I understand that Russia is an entity that we're going to have to deal with. But by the same token, right now, they seem to act in ways that are contrary to just about all of our interests.
Mr. Chairman, the hard reality is that the relationship with Russia produces both moments of consternation and conflict, as well as cooperation and effect. We did, in the course of the last years, the START Treaty. In the course of the last years, we've cooperated on Afghanistan. We have cooperated on Syria. We have cooperated on P5+1, on the Syria chemical weapons. I talked yesterday to Foreign Minister Lavrov, and I also talked to the Director General of the OPCW. Currently, 54% of the chemical weapons are out of Syria. And we have major shipments that are planned at 2 sites near Damascus. They should take place in the next days. But there's a general sense that we are concerned about the slowdown, but we still believe we could be close to schedule, on schedule or close to schedule, and we're pushing for that. And the Russians have indicated they are prepared to continue to push and to try to achieve that. They have an interest in achieving it. So, you know, there are pluses, and yes, there are minuses, obviously. We don't have the luxury as a country of being, you know, you've got to deal at this point, and in one time or another. Reagan dealt with Gorbachev. You know, Nixon dealt with Mao. It's a reality of the world that we try to move forward even as there are complications.
I appreciate that, and I understand the challenge. It's
But
just
let me
at
say,
some
I
point,
want to answer the
on
last
the barter
part of your
deal,
question.
will we sanction, if such a deal would clearly violate the regime that has been set up. And I assume that we need to make it very clear to the Iranians as well as to the Russians that such a deal would be sanctionable if it
Mr.
happened.
Chairman, we have made it clear to both sides our deep concerns about the reported oil for goods deal. It would raise serious concerns, as you've said. It would be inconsistent with the terms of the P5+1 joint plan of action. And yes, it could trigger U.S. sanctions against the entities or individuals that are involved in that deal.
Senator Corker.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate your questioning, and I'm glad you took the time you did. I did want the Secretary to see that the concerns that we have about foreign policy are very bipartisan and very sincere and very deep. And when I'm going to move to Syria, but we'll say that it's hard for me to discern the good things that have occurred relative to our negotiations with Russia, although I hope over time we'll be able to see those. But you know, when the President talked about his red line back in August of 2012, 30,000 Syrians were dead. Today, 150,000 Syrians are dead. We continue to talk about this shiny object, the chemicals, but people daily are being killed with barrel bombs. And I'd just like for you, in front of everyone, since you're up here asking for a budget request, I'd like for you to explain to us what our Syria policy is right now.
Sure, I'd be happy to, Senator. And then
And let me say this. We didn't create the Syrian problem. I understand that, and we didn't create it. But our lack of attention in dealing with it has caused it to fester to a point where now it's a national security threat to our nation. That's what certainly our leaders are saying in that area, that, you know, the amount of extremists, which we all said, I might add. I think you even said on the front end. But I would like for you just to explain to all of us again what our strategy towards Syria is today, in detail, if you would.
I'd be delighted to explain what it is, but I also wanted to explain what it's not, because I've heard people suggest many things that somehow there's, you know, I mean, you just said the word inattention to it has led it to be where it is today and so forth. I just don't agree with that, Senator. I really don't agree with that. The fact is we have paid enormous attention to it. By absolute consensus in the United States Congress last year, I don't think there was a member here who suggested there was a military, maybe one or two, who suggested there was a military solution to Syria.
No, but we did suggest arming, training.
Senator, I'm delighted. We're doing a lot of things, and we are deeply engaged with the opposition. We are more engaged than we've ever been before, right now, and more successfully right now. If you look at the
Well, would you be willing to tell us about that?
not in an open session.
Well, would you commit right now to tell us every detail of our Syrian strategy in a classified setting?
I've always felt, as the chairman knows,
Yeah.
in my years as chairman of this committee, I thought one of the great anomalies of the United States Senate was that the Foreign Relations Committee, which has to authorize and create foreign policy, isn't part of the chain that is accessed.
So you won't commit to sharing, you're up here asking.
No, I will,
Okay.
Senator.
You'll commit to sharing every detail of what our
To the
strategy
degree
is?
I am allowed to under the process and the law, I will do that. But if there are any limitations that I'm aware of, I'm not sure. But we always have these briefings down in the civets, and I'm happy to go through it with you. But let me explain what I can here in open session.
Okay.
But I want people to understand what we're doing. I came into this role in February 1st of last year. We immediately had a meeting with the foreign ministers of the so-called London 11 support group. We met in Rome, we met in Amman, and we began to coordinate our efforts with the opposition. Then in April, I think it was April, I went to Russia, met with President Putin, met with Foreign Minister Lavrov, and made the argument that we needed together to try to work towards a political solution. At that point in time, President Assad was not faring so well. And there was a great sense of insecurity in Syria. The Russians agreed that we needed to try to negotiate this. Subsequently, after agreeing to the concept of a Geneva II meeting where you would try to have a negotiation, The opposition began to have its own infighting. Nothing we could control, just the nature of the beast. And while they began to have their infighting, large numbers of jihadists began to be attracted to the effort to get rid of Assad because he was killing Sunni. And many of them are Sunni-based.
All of which everyone said was going to happen on the front end.
Yeah,
Very
well,
predicted.
Well, what was
Yeah.
the plan to not have that happen, Senator? I didn't notice Congress racing to the barriers saying, we're going to do something. I don't think the American people were going to send American troops.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you agree with the President's comments on CBS just recently that the authorization for force that you asked for, that had we done that, it would have had no effect in Syria? Do you agree with those comments?
I believe
that it would have had no effect after you came in and told us the effect that it was going to have?
Not what the President said. What the President said, it would not have had the effect of changing the calculation or the course of the war. It would have had an effect on precisely what he was asking for it for, which was to send a message to Assad about the use of chemical weapons.
So the authorization you asked for wasn't to degrade his capabilities?
Of using chemical weapons, correct. If you go back and read it, it was precisely targeted to reduce his capacity to use chemical weapons. But let me just finish the thought here. I mean,
yeah.
Everybody up here was saying, we don't want to go to war. Maybe.
No, not everybody. This committee voted to go to war.
No, they didn't vote to go to war. They voted to have a limited strike for the sole purpose of degrading his capacity to deliver chemical weapons.
And
guess what?
Did you not share with us that degrading would have a definite effect on his ability to carry out against the opposition? You didn't tell us that?
I think it would have had some effect on that, Senator, but it would not have had a devastating impact by which he had to recalculate because it wasn't going to last that long. We all know that. It took 30,000 sorties in 30 days in Bosnia to have an impact. Yeah. Here we were going to have 1 or 2 days to degrade and send a message. And guess what, Senator? We came up with a better solution to get all of them out by working through the diplomatic channel with Russia, and we have an agreement which is now working out with 54% removed, and we're moving to more. So what's your take? Would you rather drop a few bombs, send a message, and then have him still with the weapons and capacity to deliver them, or would you rather get all of them out?
Let me ask you this question. Y'all tend to, instead of meeting with us and laying out strategy, I've noticed the administration is really good at leaking things to newspapers. The chairman alluded to that 2 weeks ago when one of your assistants was making the most reckless comments that have been said before this committee. But let me just ask you, apparently there's some debate occurring relative to military action or not. Wall Street Journal reports that you're for it. We got a letter yesterday from Julia sitting right behind you. It was undated, but it said, we do not believe that there is a military solution to the Syrian crisis. But I'd like for you to share. Do you think there is or isn't? Is there a debate that's occurring right now about military action or not? Clear it up. I'd love to know whether Ann Patterson was making something up or something's
Senator,
actually occurring there.
Let me do that. I ask you to give me the time to do it because I do want to clear it up. But I also want to just finish quickly the notion. If there's no military solution, and everybody at the Pentagon would tell you there's no military solution.
But apparently you think there is.
No, I don't think there's I think there's a capacity to change Assad's calculation, and so does the President.
Which is what we discussed last August.
And we will discuss in classified session exactly what those things are. But let me come back for a minute because I want to answer your question. The reality is that if you're going to have a negotiated solution, you have to have a ripeness to the ability to be able to come. Last May, there was more ripeness. Then the situation changed on the ground. Today, Assad feels fairly secure in Damascus and in some of the corridor going north to the ports. And that's been his strategy. But around him, in the south, particularly in the east and in the north, there is not that kind of security. In fact, the opposition has made some gains recently. And so the key here is how do you get the parties to a place where they both understand that there isn't going to be a military solution that doesn't destroy the country absolutely and totally, but which ultimately could be negotiated. There has to be a recognition by both of the ripeness of that moment. It's not now. We all understand that. So the question is, can you do something in order to create that? And that's a legitimate question for the Congress, a legitimate question for the administration, And we talk about that. Of course we do.
What's the
Kick it
answer?
around, but there's no difference in our policy.
Okay.
I support the choices the president has made. We need to have a classified briefing. You need to understand where we are and what we're doing, and I look forward to having that conversation.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate you having this hearing, and Secretary Kerry, I guess we'll tell after, when you write your memoirs, whether, you know, you support the policy of the administration or not. But we certainly get a lot of conflicting reports. I look forward to
Let me ask you,
that
Senator,
classified.
be helpful in the hearing.
Yeah.
I'm happy to be the recipient of
Yeah.
some good advice. What is the, what is this, what do you believe would make the difference right now in order to get a negotiated solution? Or do you believe there is a military solution?
Yeah, so I actually strongly supported what we passed out of committee on both occasions, which was arming the vetted moderate opposition. Strongly supported that with training, doing it under the Defense Department auspice, not potentially other areas. Strongly supported that. I thought you supported that, actually. I strongly supported the limited strike that you asked for. Instead, we took another path, and we've had another 60,000 people dead there. No doubt the dynamics on the ground have changed. We've got 10,000 al-Qaeda folks on the ground, which we didn't have at the time. And yes, it's a lot more complicated now. It's destabilizing Iraq. It's destabilizing other places, and we're in a very different place. And we didn't take actions at a time when we could have made a difference. So many on this committee wanted us to do that. So yes, we're in a very complicated place. It's likely interesting that we're going to end up in a place where our interests with Russia align, because very soon we're going to get to a point where, because of the extremists on the ground there, it's a threat to their homeland and to ours. But actually, you're the Secretary of State, and I'd love to hear, you have to be disappointed by what has happened there. You have to be disappointed by the lack of action. You have to be disappointed by the indecisiveness. And candidly, we keep hearing about these things that are coming forth that are going to change the dynamic. But look.
Well, Senator, I would say to you that the fact is we are doing more than we've ever been doing. And you do need to be briefed. I'm not sure I understand why you're not. We've had all senator briefings historically on issues of the top level security. We ought to do that. I'm ready to try to make that happen. The sooner the better, because if you had that, a lot of these questions would be answered.
Senator Cardin.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I very much appreciate not only you being here, but the work that you're doing globally for U.S. interest. On Syria, let me just follow up one question where I would hope there would be a strong agreement. I've been very vocal in the human rights violations that have occurred in Syria. During war, people get hurt, but there's been an intentional targeting of civilians by the Assad regime. 10,000 children have already died in Syria. At previous hearings, we've talked about the U.S. role in making sure that those who are responsible for these gross violations of international human rights are going to be held accountable. And yet, I still don't see a game plan to bring to justice those who have targeted innocent civilians for horrible outcomes, including the use of chemical weapons. So can you just share with us what steps the United States is taking to make sure that we will have preserved the record and people will be held accountable for, because I tell you, the only way that we can try to reduce this type of action in the future is to make it clear those that are responsible are in fact held accountable by the international community.
Couldn't agree with you more, Senator, and all of those incidents are being chronicled and completely packaged, in a sense, ready for that prosecution. There are countless entities that are preparing those cases. There's no question in my mind, or in anybody's mind, I think, who watches this closely, that war crimes have been committed purposefully, intentionally, ordered at the highest level. We saw that in the case of the gas, but it goes well beyond gas. The indiscriminate bombing of civilians, the use of starvation as a tool of war against civilians, blockades. I mean, the torture of documented more than 11,000 individuals, It's a it's a human disaster beyond many words in the world. The only other place I can think of on the face of the planet where things may be worse is North Korea. And we had the UN report recently on North Korea. But, I mean, that's a level that's unfathomable since the days of Hitler. But Syria's aggression against its own people, there is no question in my mind it has to be held accountable, and we have said that we will.
Will you keep us totally engaged on a regular basis as to what progress is being made in this area?
Absolutely. I mean, part of the difficulty right now, obviously, is access to the country and to those individuals. But within the course of time, that's probably one of the reasons some of them are fighting the way they're fighting. But over time, we have historically proven we can bring people to accountability, and we will.
You have spent a great deal of time in regards to working with the Palestinians and Israelis on getting the peace talks started. In the meantime, the Palestinians have taken unilateral action dealing with recognition that is contrary to the peace negotiations, that makes it difficult, yet they will not acknowledge the right of a Jewish state. Can you just bring us up to date as to the prognosis of where we are in regards to the peace discussions?
Sure. First of all, you know it is our position, the government of the United States, we and the President supports the notion of Israel being defined as a Jewish state, and he has said that in many speeches, and it's in our policy. And we believe that that should happen, but when it happens and how it happens has to be part of the negotiation, obviously. It's not going to happen in the beginning, Senator. It's really going to be one of those narrative issues that gets resolved towards the end.
I would just point out that the acknowledgement of a Palestinian state is up front. It seems to me that the U.S. position is a clear, as part of the outcome, of the international recognition of a Jewish state, and that's not a negotiable point. So I don't quite understand when you say that that won't be acknowledged up front when the establishment of a Palestinian state is acknowledged up front.
Yeah, well, it isn't. It isn't. They don't have a state yet. You have to have borders. You have to have, defined solution to other issues before you have a state. You have to resolve issues of demilitarization and other kinds of things. But here's what's really important, Senator. Both sides, whether advertently or inadvertently, wound up in positions where things happened that were unhelpful. Clearly, going to these treaties is not helpful, and we have made that crystal clear. And we need both sides to find a way to create the level of compromise necessary to do what they both say they want to do, which is continue the talks, because they both view it as important to the future. Now, the irony, bitter irony, is that at this particular moment, this fight is over process. It's not over the substance of the final status agreement. It's over how do you get to the discussion of the final status agreement. So our hope is that we can work a way through this, but in the end, the parties are going to have to make that decision. It's not our decision. We can cajole, we can leverage, we can offer one thing or another to try to be helpful, but they have to make the fundamental decision. And in my judgment, both leaders have made courageous and important decisions up until now. For Prime Minister Netanyahu to release prisoners is a painful, difficult political step to take, enormously hard. And the people of Israel have been incredibly supportive and patient in giving him the space to be able to do that in exchange for the deal being kept of the release of prisoners and not going to the UN. Unfortunately, the prisoners weren't released on the Saturday they were supposed to be released. And so day went by, day 2 went by, day 3 went by, and then in the afternoon, when they were about to maybe get there, 700 settlement units were announced in Jerusalem, and poof, That was sort of the moment. So we find ourselves where we are. My hope is the parties will find a way back. We're working with them to try to do so, but they have to, again, I repeat, they have to make that fundamental decision, and I hope they will. I believe if they do, there is a way to get into substantive discussions now. A lot of groundwork has been laid over the last 8 months. We don't talk about it publicly. I'm not going to go into the details here. But there has been a narrowing of differences. Are there gaps? Yeah, of course there are gaps. But the narrowing of where they are and of different options of how one might deal with them is real. And I hope the parties will be able to find a way back. But, you know, we have an enormous amount on our plate. There are limits to the time the President and I, obviously, can commit to this, given the rest of the agenda, if they're not prepared to commit to actually be there in a serious way. So we'll see what happens in the next days. Our teams are still having some discussion on the ground. There was a long meeting yesterday between Palestinians and Israelis, and I'm not going to suggest anything is imminent, but one always has to remain hopeful in this very difficult, complicated process. If it were easy, it would have happened a long time ago. Plenty of secretaries of states and presidents have tried to help make this happen. Why is this moment perhaps different? Because at the back end, the consequences are more stark and clear than they've been before, and there's less space for mistakes.
Thank you, Mr.
So we
Secretary.
hope they'll make it.
Thank you. Senator Risch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I do not envy the position you're in here today. This is supposed to be a budget hearing where the American people find out what they're getting for their money. And after the discussion we've had here today, I think anybody who would come in here would have an impression that after we've looked at the issues with Russia and Iran and North Korea and Afghanistan, Pakistan, China, and the peace process, and all the difficulties with every one of these, I appreciate your view that there are some things happening which are positive, but I tell you, you can't help but get the impression that our foreign policy is just spinning out of control. And we're losing control in virtually every area that we're trying to do something in. Probably, and you know, we've got such limited time here to talk about all these problems, but probably what I want to talk about briefly are just a couple of them. One of the best examples is the one that's on the front pages today, and that is the Russian issue. You know, this administration said they were going to hit the reset button, and I can't help think that somebody hit the wrong button, because things have not gone well during this administration. And, you know, the Russians today are misbehaving worse than they have in decades, and nothing seems to change that. When you look at what they did in Georgia and still remain occupying part of Georgia when they even agreed not to, what they've done in the Ukraine, what they've done in Syria and are continuing to do in Syria. Plus, we all know about the cheating that's going on the treaties that have been entered into. I'm very disappointed at what's going on, and you can't help but be discouraged about it. I'm interested to hear your thoughts about this meeting coming up next week, because you know, you talked about what happened in Syria, and you had a very similar meeting in Syria where you sat down with Lavrov and supposedly you forged a road forward, and that road forward has been a disaster. You've heard the people talk about how many tens of thousands of people have been killed since then. The dismantling of the weapons, the chemical weapons has slowed down. What makes you think you're going to be able to make better progress on the Ukraine? I mean, we've seen this movie over and over and over again with the Russians. They misbehave, then we sit down at the table, we make some kind of an agreement, and they misbehave even worse after the agreement. So maybe you could give us a little taste of what you're going to tell Lavrov when you meet with him next week.
Well, let me give you what I consider a taste of reality, Senator, about our foreign policy and the realities of the world. Georgia happened under George Bush. Georgia happened under George Bush, and he didn't even bring a sanction. President Obama has brought sanctions, and it's having an impact. You can ask
Having
the
an
people, right?
impact?
Yes, it is having an impact. And the fact is that it will have a far more serious impact if they cross over or continue what's happening in East Ukraine. Now, I don't know anybody in the United States of America who said we ought to go to war over Crimea. Is there any member of this committee who believes that? I don't think so. So what are we doing? We're using 21st century tools, which are the tools of diplomacy to bring people together in other countries to put sanctions in place. And we now have announced the possibility of using sector sanctions. Now that's serious business, serious business. It's banking, it's energy, it's mining, it's arms, it's other things. And if you start going down that road, it's not just them who feel it, we'll feel it too. So you have to approach these things with some sense of responsibility. It's not just a speech. It's a policy, and it has implications in what happens. And the fact is that we believe they take that seriously. Now, their economy is not that strong. They don't make a lot in Russia. They extract from the ground and sell it. And so if we start changing energy policy, and we start moving with respect to LNG, and we start moving with respect to these sanctions, it can have a profound impact, and I think Russia knows it. It's not the preferred way to go. But when you say, you know, something like our foreign policy is spinning out of control, those are great talking points. They make for good, you know, sound bites on TV nowadays, but I have to tell you, Senator, that's just not true. We've helped negotiate a truce in South Sudan and helped pull that country back from the brink of civil war. We've helped to create a framework for the disarming of M23 in the Great Lakes region of Africa. We are engaged in helping the French to quell the Boko Haram and other people in the region of Mali and elsewhere. We are engaged with the Chinese very directly in helping to change their policy, which they have done, to put greater pressure on North Korea and to deal with their route to denuclearization. We've moved vessels into the region. We've sent clear messages of our need and willingness to defend the United States of America and our interests in the region. We are the force that has been helping to bring parties together to defend our interests in the South China Sea with respect to Chinese claims in that region. We've been engaged in our peace efforts in Somalia and other parts of the world in our peacekeeping. We are engaged in Syria, as I told you, leading nation in terms of humanitarian assistance, and we are doing more than any other country with respect to what's happening on the ground now with the opposition.
Well, Secretary
in the
Kerry,
Middle East peace, we're leading the effort. In the Gulf, we're leading the effort. I just don't agree with you. We're living in a complicated world.
I understand
where
you don't
there's
agree
more
with
sectarianism, there's more religious extremism, there are more young people. You know, 60 to 65% of countries are under the age of 30. 50% are under the age of 21. What is the American policy for being able to help them to be able to develop jobs in the future and not go be extremists? There's so much we need to do that depends on the budget, on the Congress, on our engagement in the world, and we are more engaged than ever before, which is why my travel schedule is what it is.
Well, Secretary Kerry, the one thing I really agree with you is that the results of foreign policy are not speeches. It is the results. It's the perception of the American people. And you heard the list we've gone through of the problems that we have, and I agree that you've certainly done some good things in some of the areas that you've just indicated. But the major issues, the major initiatives that affect the national security of this country are in very desperate situation in some places, and they're deteriorating. I understand the speeches, but I'm telling you, the American people believe that in these areas that we have talked about, particularly in Russia, our situation is deteriorating. Before my time, before the chairman cuts me off, I want to talk just briefly about Iran. I've got a constituent, and that is Pastor Abedini, who's in prison. John, you've got to do something about this. You sit across the table from these people. There is no reason he should be in prison today. You cut loose hundreds of millions of dollars to those people. You've relaxed some of the sanctions. Please help these people. Tell them you're not going to do anything more. Tell the Iranians you're not going to do anything more for them until they release him and the two other people that they are holding against all international law, against all human rights, and against any definition of morality that you have. And my time's up, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. So much to talk about. Let me just offer one thank you. I recently returned from a trip with Senator King to Israel, the West Bank, Lebanon, and Egypt. And in direct discussions with both Prime Minister Netanyahu and Mahmoud Abbas, their personal praise of you for your efforts in trying to put the United States in the appropriate position to try to find a difficult peace deal, they said almost exactly the same thing about you. They were very praiseworthy of your efforts, unprompted, and the comments that they made are comments that I have heard from our allies and partners in Egypt, Bahrain, the UAE, Jordan, Turkey, Saudi Arabia. This is a very difficult thing. It's a holy grail in international diplomacy to try to find a solution to a problem as vexing as this without venturing a thought on the potential outcome. I just want to thank you for your efforts to try to do something that would be so important in the world. I want to ask you about Syria. Syria is complicated partly because there isn't a real consensus in this body about military action. When we had a debate here in August, there was a very narrow committee vote authorizing military force for a limited purpose. The odds makers basically said, had that been taken on the floor of the House, it would have failed. In the Senate, it might have been close, but clearly there was division. But let me ask you about something where there isn't division in this body, and that's humanitarian aid to Syrians. The United States is the largest provider of humanitarian aid in the world to Syrians outside Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey especially. And that's not by accident. That's because we want to do it, and it is a bipartisan priority. Now what we need to do is focus upon the delivery of humanitarian aid to the 9 million Syrians inside Syria who need it. After many efforts to stonewall humanitarian resolutions, Russia finally acceded to one on the 22nd of September, UN Security Council Resolution 2139, which demanded that all parties, in particular the Syrian authorities, promptly allow rapid, safe, and unhindered humanitarian access to provide humanitarian access to Syrians, including, and it's specified, access across conflict lines and across borders. Last week, the Senate, after action by this committee, unanimously approved a Syrian humanitarian aid resolution that was sponsored by myself and Senator Rubio. And in part, that resolution indicated that the Senate, and it passed unanimously on the floor, supports the immediate and full implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 2139, which calls for unimpeded access of humanitarian assistance to all Syrians. The 30-day report after the UN Security Council resolution says 30 days in, there's not unimpeded access. What is the United States going to do to help carry out the unimpeded access provision of the UN Security Council resolution that we fought for months to see pass?
Well, we're very disappointed in that, obviously, and you're absolutely correct. It has not been successfully implemented. We are pushing in the region to see if we can get a consensus about ways in which we might approach that, and that's part of the consideration of what we should talk about in classified session.
I view that as important, again, just to underscore the point. Where you have division here over something like what is the right military step, that's going to make it complicated. But where you have unanimity that we want to be the largest provider of humanitarian access and we want to do what we can to provide unimpeded access in the country, that's a place I think where much can be done. So I look forward to that discussion. Next question I'll ask, and my last question, is when you were here a year ago, I asked you a question about, that is a budgetary matter but also a policy matter. For a number of years, the State Department had assessed that the training of embassy security personnel needed to be done in a more thorough way and in a more, with better facilities and better coursework. Prior to the horrible attack on Benghazi in September of 2011, the State Department had identified a training facility on a BRAC Army base in Virginia, Fort Pickett, and it indicated that was going to be the training facility for embassy security personnel needs. After the attack in Benghazi, the ARB report recommended, as a key recommendation, Recommendation 17, that security training had to be improved. The State Department, in response to that recommendation, said, we're going to do it, and we've identified the site. We've looked for it for years. It's going to be at Fort Pickett, and we're going to get moving on it. Last winter, February or March, largely in sort of a back and forth between the State Department and the OMB, that plan to proceed in Fort Pickett was slowed down. I asked you about it a year ago. We're here a year later, and there's not been any appreciable movement on the proposal to upgrade the security training, in this instance, of State Department personnel. If an enhanced security training facility at Fort Pickett was a good idea before Benghazi, my assessment is, in the aftermath of Benghazi, with an ARB recommendation, it's a better idea. Why haven't we moved forward on this with more dispatch?
Well, we are moving forward. The reason it didn't go forward as rapidly as you would have hoped, or I would have hoped, was from somewhere, I'm not even sure of the details, there was a suggestion of an alternative site that had to be evaluated. It was properly evaluated, due diligence was done. The department is 100% determined that Fort Pickett is the best site. It's the site that we want to work with you to go forward on. There's no question of that. And we want to try to do that as fast as we can. There's coordination with the Defense Department, the intelligence community, et cetera. Fort Pickett is the site.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Chair, I just say in our travels, when I see these foreign security officers, like in Lebanon, living on a compound, and they get 6 hours a week, and that's all they get off compound, and they have to be accompanied by security, I don't think we should be penny-wise and pound-foolish on security training for our FSOs. I think it's an important initiative, and the ARB report recommends, with an underline and an exclamation point, that we ought to be moving more quickly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I agree with the Senator. As you know from our embassy security bill, there's provisions as it relates to this, and you've been the most successful member today. You got a very direct, specific, positive answer. Senator Rubio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here, Mr. Secretary. I
Thanks a
appreciate
lot.
it very much. I also want to thank you in your written testimony for mentioning the crisis in Venezuela. I wanted to talk about that briefly. As you know, they had elections about a year ago in Venezuela where there was credible reports of irregularities, but even leading up to the election, the government controls all the modes of communication, denying the opposition airtime, meanwhile dominating the airtime for the government. Of course, the government there has invested heavily in these armed militias called colectivos, which are basically these neighborhood groups armed by the government who go out intimidating and, in fact, shooting and killing protesters in the current protests that are going on. They've jailed members of the opposition. They control the courts. About 90% of the judges in Venezuela, or a significant percentage of the judges in Venezuela, serve on a provisional basis, which means at any point they could be removed by President Maduro if he chose to do so. In fact, they recently removed a member of their National Assembly because she, according to them, had the gall of appearing at the Organization of American States and traveling abroad to condemn what is happening within that country. In addition, as you're well aware, in July of 2009, the General Accounting Office found that the so-called Bolivarian National Guard, the Venezuelan National Guard, is deeply involved in the trafficking of illicit narcotics. And as you know, our government has significant concerns about senior Venezuelan government officials being involved as well in transnational criminal activities, including people like Mr. Hugo Carvajal, Mr. Henry Rangel Silva, the former defense minister and now is the governor of Trujillo State, Mr. Tariq El Assami, who is the governor of Aragua State, a congressman by the name of Freddy Bernal, and last but not least, the president of their own Congress, Mr. Diosdado Cabello. All of these are people we have concerns about in terms of their engagement in transnational criminal activity. So here's my question. Why can't we just say what is obvious to anyone who sees these facts, that the government of Venezuela is not and does not comport itself as a democracy, and in fact, because of all of these activities and others, and violence against their own people, have lost the legitimacy of a government? Are we prepared to say that as a matter of stated policy of the United States?
Senator, first of all, let me thank you for and congratulate you for your leadership on this, because it is important. I appreciate enormously the clear message in Senate Resolution 365 that deplores the repression and the violence against the people of Venezuela, and we've spoken out against it and criticized their ridiculously contrived attacks on us as somehow being engaged in doing things that we haven't been engaged in, and so forth. Right now, we're very supportive of third-party mediation efforts that are aimed at trying to end the violence and see if we can't get an honest dialogue to address the legitimate grievances of people in Venezuela. Even as we're sitting here today, I think the UNASUR delegation is meeting in Caracas, and for the first time, the government and the opposition is going to be meeting today as we meet here. So this is a very delicate time in the possibility of a negotiation, and I don't think we should, I don't want to, do something today that provides cannon fodder for them to use me or us as an excuse to say this is why they have to do things or
Yeah,
something.
and I understand that concern. I mean, my bigger concern is that our interest in stability, which is what the hope of this negotiation would be, somehow takes precedent over our stated foreign policy of standing always on the side of liberty, freedom, democracy, respect for human rights, all of which are being systematically abused by
And
this
we have
government.
said
I think it's important for the people in Venezuela to know that the United States condemns these acts of violence that are going on and all the other things that I've mentioned. And I just don't understand why we can't look to this and say, by the way, just because you had an election does not make you a democracy. There are other aspects of democracy, and this government in Venezuela does not behave like a democracy.
They are putting that to the test. There's no question about it, Senator, and I don't disagree with you. We have spoken out. I've issued statements personally. I called the foreign minister some time ago to weigh in. We've had our people, as you know, on the ground speaking out. So I don't think there's any question for the people of Venezuela where we stand. The question is there a way to protect those people and earn for them the ability to be able to get out of jail, express their rights in the political process, and fight for the future of their country? I think let's let this meeting take place. Let's see what happens, and there's time for you and me and others to work on this and see if we have to go a different road forward.
I have one more question about another part of the hemisphere. Last summer, the Cuban regime was caught smuggling over 240 tons of weapons to North Korea in violation of international law. The United Nations has confirmed this. In fact, it's the largest interdiction of weapons to or from North Korea since the UN sanctions were imposed. What has been the United States' reaction to that? What have we done in reaction to this violation of UN sanctions?
We are working directly with the DPRK Sanctions Committee at the UN in order to ensure a vigorous response, to shine a light on this activity, and to get accountability for what has happened. In our dialogue with them, we've thus far focused on the individuals who have been involved in this and the entities involved in it. So in March, along with like-minded states, we pushed to make the panel of experts report public on the incident that was released. It's the first time the panel of experts report has been made public since June of last year. And we have made clear that this violates the sanctions, and Cuba's interpretation of the UN Security Council resolution is incorrect. So we intend to review the results of the UN process and try to see if we can get a united multilateral response.
Would you agree that this evidence that's now out there before the public is strong evidence of the fact that Cuba remains a state sponsor of terrorism?
Well, in this sense, they've exported weapons, and that certainly would contribute to that judgment. But in other respects, it's a question, it still doesn't fit the legal definition, Senator, but you and I, in a common sense point of view, would say this is...
What about holding an American hostage like Mr. Alan Gross? Would that...
That's, it's an act of personal terror. It's not international terrorism under the sense of the definition that fits for the designation. I will tell you that I think just today, Alan Gross announced that he's going to engage in a hunger strike. We are deeply involved in this. I met with his family just a few weeks ago, a month ago or so. We have a number of efforts underway, which I'd be happy to talk to you about privately. But we are very, very focused on trying to get Alan Gross out of there. His treatment is inhumane, and he is wrongfully imprisoned.
Mr. Secretary, let me just add on, selling weapons to North Korea in violation of Security Council resolutions, the only country in the Western Hemisphere, the largest such violation of the Security Council resolution by any country, is, in my view, a pretty significant terrorist act. But Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you very much for being here and for all of your efforts to address so many conflicts and hotspots around the world. I understand that nobody has yet mentioned today the recent election in Afghanistan. And while we don't have a full report in, the early reports are that that election was significant, that the turnout was over 60%. And it's a real tribute to the people of Afghanistan that they came out in defiance of threats from the Taliban. It's also a tribute to all of the military efforts on the part of the United States and the international community, and the diplomatic efforts and the economic assistance programs that the United States has provided to Afghanistan. So let me congratulate you and everyone at the State Department who has worked so hard to support the people of Afghanistan. One of the programs that the State Department is currently engaged in that I've worked on is the Afghan Special Immigrant Visa Program. And as we are preparing for the transition in Afghanistan, I believe that there is still a continued need for us to ensure that all of those Afghans who have helped our men and women on the ground there, who are threatened, they and their families are threatened, have the opportunity to try and come to this country to rebuild their lives. And I wonder if you can update me on the status of the program. There were some issues that were not working very well with the program last year that I know the State Department has been addressing. Can you give us an update on how those are going?
I'd be delighted to, Senator. Thank you for your comments at the beginning of your question. And let me just say quickly about the Afghan election. I want to join you. A couple of people did mention that it's sort of been passing that it happened, but this is very significant. But I don't want to overblow it because it's the first one and you've got to get through the runoff and there's still challenges. But nevertheless, you know, millions of Afghan men and women went to the polls and they voted for their next president. It's something that was unfathomable not so long ago. People wondered if this could be achieved. The last couple of months in Afghanistan, there was a full and open, flourishing debate in Afghanistan as people listened to the candidates. And I think what's really important to understand is this was owned and operated, managed, run by Afghans. It was their election commission. It was their rules. They put this together. They made this happen. And I give great credit to President Karzai, who appointed the commission, played by the rules, helped make this happen, to all the people who have been invested in this. And so it's and their army helped provide the security. We helped with the planning and laid out some of the thoughts about it, but they helped execute it. So it's very important. It's a critical step forward. There will be challenges ahead. I don't want anybody to suggest, you know, this smooths the way completely at all. There are big challenges, but this is important. Now, on the special immigrant visas, we have improved the processing times. We've expanded the outreach to current and former employees who may be eligible. We've issued more special immigrant visas in Afghanistan and in Iraq, incidentally, than at any time in any previous year. Since October of last year, more than 2,000 Afghans, interpreters, their family members, have received special immigrant visas. There are over 700 principal applicants and more than 1,300 of their dependent family members. And in the first 5 months of this year, we've issued more SIVs in Afghan to their dependents than in all of last year. So I think there's a lot of work, you know, being done, even as we're maintaining the standards that you want and other people want with respect to the program itself. I think the current allocation of visa numbers, the 3,000 that are allocated, should get us through this year. But it won't be enough to handle the cases in the pipeline, and we're going to have to, you know, we're going to have to expect that new applications are going to come, you know, have to be approved as we go forward.
Well, thank you. I certainly look forward to continuing to work with the State Department on that program. On a note that is not so positive. Last week, it came to light that the State Department's Office of Inspector General has discovered that over the past 6 years, contracts worth more than $6 billion have lacked complete and, in some cases, no records, and that many of the files for contracts supporting our U.S. mission in Iraq couldn't be located. So I wonder if you could tell us what actions the State Department is taking in response to the concerns that have been raised by the Inspector General.
Well, let me begin by saying that we hadn't had an Inspector General at the State Department for 4 years. What? 3.5 years or more, there was no Inspector General.
Right. And I appreciate your swift action to try and
I decided that we needed
get one
I think
hired.
it's important. It's an important part of oversight. And so I hired Steve Linick, who is our current Inspector General, who came from FHFA, but who also has been a former federal prosecutor. He's an outstanding attorney and a good person for the job. And I welcome the oversight. That's number one. Number two, I began this process of looking at the possible sort of liabilities that came from my time here on the committee. When I traveled to Afghanistan, I saw the contracting and recognized the corruption that existed in Afghanistan itself and other problems. So when I first came in, I told folks, we got to really get a handle on what's happening here. What we found is, and what this Inspector General report confirms, is there have been some problems in just paperwork management. We know where no money, it's no $6 billion has been lost. The money is accountable, but it's keeping up with the paperwork. And part of the problem is, I have learned, and this is important to the budget process, every single entity of government where we're managing contracting is under-resourced, understaffed, and it's hard to be able to keep up with the paper. Now you say, why not go electronic? Well, in some of these places, electronic isn't exactly an option, Afghanistan or other places, but it takes people. And so we are under-resourced with respect to that, but we're on it. The Deputy Secretary of State for Management is pursuing this completely. We will have a report to the Inspector General showing exactly where they are and where they're going. And this is a good process. I think people should welcome this kind of oversight and accountability. It helps us get on top of things.
Thank you.
Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, welcome back. You know,
Thank you.
you left this committee, took on your new role at the same time I joined this committee, and it's been a rather momentous time in history. I think most Americans would really like to concentrate on the enormous domestic challenges, but you know, reality is pretty well smacking us all in the face, and we have, like Senator Risch, I don't envy you or the President's task having to grapple with these enormous challenges, kind of evidenced by this hearing. I'd like to concentrate on what I think is right now the most pressing of all these problems, and it really is going back to Ukraine and our relationship with Russia. I was part of the bipartisan delegation that was there the day before they took the vote in Crimea, and certainly as we were meeting with Prime Minister Yatsenyuk, you could see the stress in his face. It was pretty sobering. I think we could also sense the disappointment that the United States wasn't even willing to offer small arms and ammunition to support the courageous people of Ukraine. In response to my question, I was asking, well, what can we do? What can we do to support Ukraine? And Prime Minister Yatsenyuk, first of all, made the statement that Vladimir Putin will not respond to words. He only responds to action. Now, in your testimony here, you say you've made it clear about our deep concerns that we will not hesitate to use 21st century tools. I just want to ask, what are we going to do? What actions are we going to take to change the calculus of Vladimir Putin, who will only respond to action? What are we going to do to make the price high for Vladimir Putin if he continues the provocations? You're saying that's contrived crisis, contrived pretext. I mean, but bottom line, the reason we heard from this administration they weren't willing to provide arms is we thought it would create a provocation. Well, he doesn't need a provocation. What Vladimir Putin needs is deterrence. What are we going to do to deter Vladimir Putin from going further in Ukraine?
Well, we're doing it. I mean, look, We are,
Just a minute, they mocked at our last set of sanctions.
I beg your pardon?
They mocked our
No,
last set of sanctions.
the last set were not mocked. The first round met with some, because I think people's expectations were higher. But look, Senator, you know this in dealing with human nature and with problems that you want to aim before you shoot. And I think it's clear that we have huge capacity to have an impact. They're not incapable of analyzing America's capacity here with respect to banking and finance and movement of people and so forth. So what we wanted to do initially was make it clear there's going to be action. And the Europeans have marched together with us, in partnership here, in unanimous form. And that has a profound impact, because Europe does a lot more business with Russia than we do.
But Vladimir Putin is, as you're saying, he is creating this provocation.
Well, but
they are moving into cities in Ukraine.
The question
he's
is,
setting up the exact same circumstances as he did in Georgia, as he did in Crimea.
could be, but he could also not be. And I don't have the answer to exactly what step he's going to take when. What I do know is that we are sending a signal today of the clarity of our intention to use whatever sanction is necessary if they continue. Now, that's clear, and that's taking full aim. And the question is, will that have an impact or won't it? I think, given the fact that yesterday, at their initiation, they called us to suggest that it was important to have a meeting to try to deal with this. I'm not going to place any stock in a meeting. I'm not going to place it on words. It's got to be actions. But you got to sit down and at least find out.
Well, and of course, that's my point. What actions? The former governor of your state, Governor Romney, was pretty well mocked by this president when he said that Russia was America's greatest geopolitical foe. He wrote an interesting column. I just want to read part of it. Why across the world are Americans' hands so tied, which kind of seems like we are? A large part of the answer is our leaders' terrible timing. In virtually every foreign affairs crisis we have faced these past 5 years, there was a point when America had good choices and good options. There was a juncture when America had the potential to influence events, but we failed to act at the propitious moment. The moment having passed, we were left without acceptable options. And he went on to say, it is hard to name even a single country that has more respect and admiration for America today than when President Obama took office. And now Russia's in Ukraine. If you disagree with that, can you name a country that has greater respect for America 5 years later?
I could name lots of countries that have greater respect for us as we are attempting to move people out of Guantanamo, as we end a war in Iraq, as we are beginning to draw down in Afghanistan, as we stand up for human rights, as we are the single greatest supporter of humanitarian effort in Syria, as we do countless things, as we save 5 million kids' lives in Africa with our program on AIDS. There are many things that people admire about what we're doing. Are there problems? Sure, there are problems. In different parts of the world, there's greater sectarianism, greater religious extremism, greater radical Islam presence in various places. You're going to dump all of that on the United States of America? Because, I mean, please, this is a complicated world, my friend. And the fact is, the United States, I think, is doing an amazing amount with some handicaps, I might add. A budget that is getting smaller, not bigger. Having to hold back on what we're doing in certain countries, having to cut in certain places what we've been doing to try to help people educate or change or provide health care or do some of the things we do. So I think you need to look carefully at this kind of talk about the action that produces the differential. President Putin didn't decide to do what he did in Crimea because of something the United States did or didn't do. He decided to do it because he could, and it was in his interest. And again,
and he didn't feel he'd pay a price. Again, trust me, I totally blame Vladimir Putin. If there's further bloodshed, it's because of Vladimir Putin. But we have to deter.
you have to measure price in certain ways. Is he paying a price? His oligarchs are not able to travel to some of their, various places. They're losing money. Their ruble has gone down 7%. There's an impact in Europe. I think he's had a massive change in public opinion in Ukraine. People who once felt better about Russia don't today. He's united many Ukrainians, even those who are Russian-speaking, against Russia.
But he's still sending in agents. He's still sending in agents under the pretext for further action. He's not been deterred.
Yes, he is. No, he hasn't stopped doing that. That is accurate. But there are, I think, questions about legitimate questions before you pull the trigger that need to be answered about what they may or may not be willing to do in the next days. They're willing to meet with Europe, with Ukrainians. That's a step forward. They're willing to sit with the interim government of Ukraine, with Europe, with the United States, in an effort to sort of plot a road ahead. And we have made it clear the imperative to de-escalate, the imperative to demobilize, the imperative to move troops. After my meeting in Paris, they did announce the drawback of one particular battalion. Not enough yet, not what we are obviously looking for, but a first signal. And the question now is, can some of their other legitimate interests be met in a way that is appropriate, which doesn't invite illegitimate interests to also be mixed into the batch? And that's the key. I don't know the answer to that question yet, and I don't think we will until we meet. But I do think that given the serious implication of the sector sanctions, we owe it to ourselves and to everybody to exhaust the possible remedies that the diplomatic process might provide. We haven't done that yet, and we're going to find out. Obviously, yesterday was a step backwards, no question about it. And we've spoken out loudly and clearly as a consequence of it and made clear what our determination is.
Thank you.
America must face reality, and hope's not a strategy. Thanks.
Let me congratulate Senator Murphy on behalf of his state. He's proudly wearing his Yukon pin. I know there are other members of the committee who will not feel, but we appreciate the excellent game of both sides, but we want to congratulate Senator Murphy as he's beaming today. So, Senator Murphy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We wear our Husky allegiance on our sleeve and also on our lapel. Secretary Kerry, thank you very much for being here today. I think there are a number of guiding principles behind Putin's foreign policy. One of them clearly is to reestablish control over what he calls the near abroad. But one of them also is to do whatever he can to poke a stick in the eye of the United States. And while I certainly understand some of the arguments and some of the interest by members of the Senate to arm the Ukrainian military, in a lot of ways, that plays directly into his hands by creating a military contest in Ukraine between the United States and Russia. And if this is ultimately just a geopolitical battle between the United States and Russia over Ukraine, we lose because we're playing in his backyard and we are not willing to play by the same rules that he is willing to play by. And so, Mr. Secretary, I guess I want to ask you a question about how we take steps to insert the Ukrainians back into this discussion about their future relationship with Russia. And I maybe want to ask that in sort of two ways. One, how do we shift the diplomatic conversations from conversations between you and Lavrov to conversations that are truly or make sure that the Ukrainians are part of that discussion? And second, what are the things that we can do leading up to the May 25th elections to make sure that they come off in a free and fair manner and the Russians have no ability between now and then to try to influence that choice? Clearly, we're getting some really, really discouraging signals about some of the actions that Russians are taking on the ground today to try to intimidate candidates, perhaps to try to dissuade people from coming out to the polls. What we've heard over and over again is that this is a revolution of dignity in Ukraine, that they want control over their destiny again. How do we put them at the center of these political deliberations? How do we support the upcoming elections to make sure that they actually get to register a free and fair choice?
Well, Senator, thank you. Terrific question, and congratulations on the Huskies. We've been really working, we've been very sensitive to, and I think proactive in our efforts to make certain that everything is emanating from the Ukrainians. And so we have said very, very clearly that no decision will be made for Ukraine without Ukraine. I talk to Prime Minister Yatsenyuk regularly, before I have a meeting, after I have a meeting, and in between, in order to make sure that we're listening very, very carefully to what they need and don't want. But they do want us engaged, and they do want us supporting them in the way that we are through these discussions. Now, yesterday, in my conversation with Foreign Minister Lavrov, I said it was really important for him to have a conversation directly with the Foreign Minister of Ukraine. And he said, I intend to call him after we have talked, and he did. And they had a good conversation, from what I understand, and agreed to sort of, try to come to this meeting and see if we can work constructively going forward. Now, look, I've been around long enough to know that scheduling a meeting, having a meeting, doesn't solve the problem necessarily. And it can't become a camouflage for the realities that have to change on the ground. We all understand that. But if you don't talk and you don't try to arrive at some understanding of what the steps are that become the actions that are measurable, you're never going to get there. And things spiral out of control and become worse. So what we're trying to do is manage the process going forward with a clarity that things were professed before going into Crimea that weren't upheld. Statements were made about not, violating the integrity of Ukraine, and they did. And so all of these protests or proffers have to be taken with a grain of salt pending the process. So we will continue to work very closely with Ukrainians. Our ambassador on the ground, Jeff Pyatt, you guys have met him, is terrific. He's very engaged. He's listening carefully. And we are talking regularly with all of the members of the interim government. Now, with respect to the election, it is interesting that in our last meeting in Paris, there was, while not accepting the legitimacy necessarily, there was no effort to change the date of the election. There was no sense that that is not going to go forward. Now, yesterday raises some question marks about that, and they're concerning, obviously. But we will continue to try to work, and I might add, it's not